Picture this, hundreds of staring eyes at the year's most exclusive luxury auto expo. Charlotte Vance, ruthless CEO of Ventara Motors. She aimed a manicured finger right at Mason Cole, projecting her voice so the whole premium hall heard, "And who are you exactly?" Some dirty mechanic wandering in off the street. The rich crowd laughed, camera flashes erupted. Mason stood absolutely silent. Offering a calm nod, the underdog engineer turned around, leaving the booth without a word. Moving slow and steady, like the arrogant room had just humiliated itself, not him. 23 minutes later, an entirely unbranded, handcrafted supercar rolled quietly onto the outdoor demonstration track. The entire snobby exhibition just stopped breathing. Stick with me. We are about to uncover what that machine was, and why Charlotte Vance couldn't look away. This Detroit luxury car expo rolled around each October like a religion for the industry. An elite gathering of snobs bowing down to raw speed, slick design, and total market dominance. That specific year, the massive showcase devoured the entire length of Cobo Center's main hall, a cavernous room wide enough to swallow 3 football fields. Drenched in intense studio lights that turned every chrome surface into a gleaming mirror, making every dangling press badge a proud little symbol of high society belonging. Deep, thumping ambient music echoed around, mingling with that sharp, expensive scent of fresh rubber, plus the endless chatter of wealthy folks faking expertise to impress each other. Automotive journalists prowled in tight packs. Slick brand reps quietly rehearsed pitches in corners. Wealthy investors strolled the aisles with that arrogant swagger of men who never check a price tag. This space instantly judged and sorted everyone into harsh social tiers without asking permission. And that brutal judgment happened the second you walked through the door. Mason Cole pushed through that main entrance at 7:42 in the morning, way before the flashy press keynotes, before the snobby crowds had truly thickened. At 47, he actually looked like a rugged guy who spent decades building real engines with his hands, not just pitching them. Just a faded blue button-down shirt and standard khaki trousers, plus beat-up leather shoes, their heels ground down on the outer edges from sheer mileage. He walked with the heavy steps of a mechanic standing on concrete all day, not a flashy executive. No expensive camera bag, no fancy recording gear, no slick media press kit. Tucked under his left arm was a beat-up manila folder, slightly bent at the corner. The sort of file that gets hauled around a dirty garage and slammed down way too many times. An old press badge hung clipped to his shirt pocket. An annual pass he kept renewing out of habit, long after he quit working for any giant corporate machine. He honestly never saw a reason to let it go. You and I probably would have missed his quiet, laser-focused purpose, precisely because he wasn't showing off. He stopped at a flashy European hybrid setup for maybe 3 seconds total. His sharp eyes scanned the air intake and wheel arch clearance. Then he just kept moving. Beside a massive German manufacturer's booth, he ducked down slightly, tilting his head to look directly through the slick lower grille, noting the cooling hardware behind it. That raw, instinctive teardown glance that only a true undercover engineer or grease-stained mechanic possesses. No snobby brand rep approached him. No polished assistant offered a glossy brochure. Inside a hall packed with executives broadcasting their massive egos, Mason flew entirely under the radar. And the arrogant room returned the favor, giving the underdog nothing back. Picture this. 3 years ago, Mason sat at the executive conference table inside Harrington Automotive, one of the 5 biggest corporate automakers in North America. He pitched a battery management system he spent 14 grueling months building. Its thermal regulation architecture was completely different from anything the industry used. It actively distributed heat, routing load dynamically across individual cells instead of treating the pack like one dumb thermal block, which meant the battery degradation curve was fundamentally flatter. The safe operating limits under continuous heavy load were dramatically pushed out. The corporate board actually listened. They fired off questions that were, honestly, exactly the right things to ask. And Mason answered every single one. He had the patience of an engineer who knew the gap between a brilliant idea and a funded idea wasn't always bridged by pure engineering logic. Then those executives chose the cheap, mass-produced option, the tech that functioned just well enough and cost pennies to license and integrate. Their margin analysis was absolute. At companies that massive, the bottom line usually is. Mason handed in his resignation 11 days later. He wasn't furious about it, not the kind of toxic rage that infects how a man carries himself daily. He was just totally finished. done with the soul-crushing exhaustion of watching genuine innovation lose to corporate convenience. He knew clearly and without any drama that he had hit the wall of what he'd sacrifice inside rigid systems built by someone else. You and I find him standing before the Ventara Motors booth, the most massive exhibit here. Ventara built out their expo space the way arrogant luxury brands do. Flawless white surfaces, silver spotlighting, and a dramatic centerpiece that demanded everyone's absolute attention. Their new Ventara Apex sat dead center, slowly spinning on a low-illuminated platform. A pure electric powerhouse. Their flagship sedan had sparked magazine covers across 4 continents since its flashy reveal last week. The exterior styling was striking. Sweeping lateral lines and an aggressive roof profile that screamed pure speed while standing still. Glowing digital screens flashed their hyped performance specs in massive bold text. Public relations staff glided around in tailored charcoal suits, every single hand gesture and corporate smile perfectly rehearsed. Mason hovered right at the outer edge of their booth, staring down that supercar the exact way a surgeon studies an X-ray. He wasn't blinded by the polish. He read the engineering underneath. He cracked open a plain manila folder, pulling out hand-drawn technical diagrams covered in notes. He gripped that messy paper with both hands, matching the hidden genius in his head to the corporate machine. CEO Charlotte Vance stepped up onto the raised, center stage platform in the Ventara exhibit right at 8 o'clock sharp. The entire crowd instantly shifted to worship her without a single word. She was 38. She carried that distinct smugness of an executive who never had to fight for her total authority. Absolute power was just the air she breathed daily. Her tailored suit was the color of deep ocean water. A tiny microphone was pinned to her sharp lapel. The moment she started speaking, "Let's watch this closely." Her voice oozed fake warmth, perfectly controlled by a boss who had rehearsed this exact pitch 100 times, knowing precisely how to manipulate the wealthy crowd's energy. Picture this with me. The automotive press leaned in, lenses locked. The luxury showroom fell dead silent. Charlotte rattled off her supercar specs with the smug ease of a CEO who already owned the room. Electric range, fast-charging architecture, the active suspension setup. Then she hit the crown jewel, Ventara's highly marketed proprietary thermal integration system. An electric vehicle battery management design. Supposedly a total breakthrough, built completely in-house by her elite engineering team. She proudly claimed a thermal safety limit of 62 degrees Celsius under stress. Mason stood in the shadows at the back and heard that exact figure. The Underdog engineer didn't flinch. He glanced at his own hand-drawn diagrams, looked back at the $1 million supercar, and slowly raised his hand. A simple, unpretentious motion, open palm, arm raised just high enough. The quiet confidence of a guy used to solving problems the billionaires overlooked. The arrogant CEO noticed. She let 10 seconds tick by, playing the power dynamic before finally tilting her head his way. "Thank you," Mason said, his tone perfectly steady. "Miss Vance, the presentation slide you just skipped listed a safe thermal limit for the EV cell pack at 62 degrees Celsius under load, but based on the battery architecture in your own technical release. The pack hits 71 to 74 degrees at speeds over 140 kilometers per hour after 8 minutes. How exactly does your active cooling system handle that massive thermal gap?" The question was surgically precise, not aggressive, just undeniable. You know the feeling. It dropped into the room like a heavy anvil. A solid truth their marketing money couldn't easily move. The VIP crowd fell quiet, then the CEO smiled. The practiced, incredibly condescending smirk of a billionaire swatting away a minor annoyance. "And you are," she asked. "Mason Cole, with which brand?" "Independent." Charlotte let her arrogant gaze sweep across the expo. A slow, theatrical look that invited the rich crowd to mock him. Then she looked back at Mason with fake, patient amusement. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I think you're confusing our glossy marketing brochures with actual internal engineering data. My elite team validated these numbers through over 3,000 hours of testing. I'm extremely curious what exactly you have validated and where. In your little garage?" You and I both know the cruel laughter echoed loud enough to sting. A pack of industry journalists at the back sneered, enjoying the public humiliation. 2 corporate PR reps traded a smug, deeply satisfied look over the Underdog's takedown. Mason didn't laugh, his face didn't even turn red. He held the CEO's gaze for 2 long seconds, not aggressive, just knowing. Calm and totally unfazed, he looked down at the handmade diagrams in his hand. He carefully matched the edges, pressed the crease perfectly flat, and slid the math back inside his cheap folder. Meanwhile, two burly expo security guards had flanked him on both sides while the luxury crowd laughed. Called by some hidden signal, the humble engineer missed. One security guard put a heavy hand on his shoulder, using that practiced corporate intimidation, meant to quietly escort nobodies out. Mason didn't fight back. He calmly fixed his cheap collar with one hand, securing the worn folder under his arm. Then he strolled toward the exit, keeping the exact same quiet pace he used walking in. Not a single glance back at the gleaming stage, no reaction to the flashing press cameras. The mocking crowd parted to let him through, and he vanished. But stick with me here. Adrian Holt was a seasoned reporter covering high-end automotive technology for almost 20 years now, starting out at Wire Services before landing his current heavy-hitting gig at Auto Vector magazine. He stood just 2 meters to the Underdog's left when that humiliating question was dropped. His audio recorder was already rolling long before this unknown guy ever raised his hand. A pure survival instinct he built decades ago in the cutthroat luxury motor press world. He watched this quiet father slip out the side doors. He watched the CEO smugly reset her posture on stage, snapping the VIP crowd back with some slick corporate catchphrase, pushing forward into her shiny presentation as if crushing a working-class dad was just a tiny inconvenience. But Adrian stood frozen in his spot for a few seconds longer than anyone else. Recorder still capturing audio, staring at the exact doorway where Mason Cole faded away. Across 20 years of elite press rooms and sprawling expos, he had watched security drag countless protesters away from microphones. The furious screamers, the absolute tinfoil lunatics, the completely lost and confused folks. You might wonder why. Well, he'd never seen someone leave with such terrifying ice-cold stillness. Like the mocking crowd had somehow just doomed themselves, instead of actually embarrassing him. Out back, the north exit dumped into a loading tunnel smelling of cold diesel exhaust. Heavy air and that hollow, bitter loneliness you only find behind massive luxury venues. Mason marched through without breaking his stride, shoved the heavy doors, and hit the pale October sunlight. Autumn in Michigan holds this very specific washed-out golden light, kind of dull, cutting across at a sharp low angle, making every single underdog cast a surprisingly long dark shadow. He paused on the rough concrete, inhaling the freezing air, before pulling his phone out to type a quick text. Just 3 little words. He hit send, heading for the east lot. The outdoor demo track sat on a massive paved stretch east of the main arena, linked entirely by a covered walkway. One half served as a fancy showcase area where million-dollar hypercars sat perfectly angled for greedy photographers and rich buyers. The other half was a hardcore performance strip. 400 meters of flawless tarmac rigged with speed traps, high-speed engineering cameras bolted to overhead frames, flanked by modest bleachers for the elite crowd. This proving ground wasn't officially open to the public yet, with the morning circus still happening indoors. The back staging zone hid the afternoon's demonstration beasts securely inside their trailers, some completely covered in giant corporate logos while others wore loud, expensive custom vinyl. But way down at the far right end, shoved against the cheap metal fence, sat one beat-up gray hauler with zero corporate flash, just a tiny white sticker on the back door using letters no bigger than a standard license plate. Cold Dynamics Detroit. Mason popped the padlock and started peeling back a heavy canvas tarp piece by piece, totally unbothered. We're about to see a handcrafted machine that defies all logic. This wasn't your standard luxury auto expo sedan. The roof sat lower, yet it wasn't a flashy sports coupe desperate for crowd reactions either. It split the difference perfectly, holding long, aggressive proportions without looking like a stretched-out toy, proving its physical footprint was earned organically, driven by hidden genius engineering inside, rather than some arrogant styling choice slapped on top. Mason mixed that matte silver-gray paint with his own hands, working alone in his garage, creating a finish that absorbed the glaring expo spotlights. It gave his handcrafted build a quiet power, totally clashing with the flashy, overpriced supercars showing off all around him. No luxury badges, no arrogant brand names plastered on the trunk or doors, just absolute anonymity. It stood entirely on its own. Then CEO Violet Marsh strutted over from the VIP staging area, moving with that smug urgency of a billionaire who just walked out of a board meeting. She still wore her Ventara brand lanyard. Stopping 3 steps from Mason's Underdog build, she stared at it in heavy, judging silence. Violet had known the quiet engineer for 15 years. They had worked together at Harrington Motors for 6 years. Both worked in powertrain development, back when the brand actually cared about real engineering, before corporate greed took over completely. You and I know how that goes. Executives eventually decided true innovation cost way too much. She had kept tabs on his underground projects ever since. The way you watch a brilliant mechanic, whose judgment you secretly respect, even though he chose the humble path, while she took the ruthless corporate road to the very top. She knew the single dad had been tinkering with a custom automotive project, but she never expected this shocking reveal. "Lord," she muttered with a smirk. That was the highest praise her wealthy ego would ever allow. She circled the vehicle slowly, inspecting his handiwork like a corporate predator. The rear sat slightly higher than the middle, nothing flashy. Just enough to prove this underdog engineer cared deeply about raw performance physics, while her brand chased fake visual drama over actual high-speed aerodynamic airflow management. Crouching by the rear quarter, she examined a custom wheel design her corporate engineers couldn't fathom. A radial spoke pattern that felt incredibly deliberate yet completely alien to her. Standing up to peer through the driver's window, the cabin layout completely stunned her. Think about it. Every other luxury car here flashed a massive central touchscreen. Tech screens were so standard now, the wealthy auto crowd considered them an absolute necessity. Mason's humble machine had 0 screens. A tight mechanical cluster of old-school analog gauges dominated the center dash instead, supported only by one tiny 7-inch display hidden low on the left side. Everything else was cold, raw metal. A distinct matte-finished composite material layered across the handmade door panels, and a pair of rugged seats built strictly for high-speed function over luxury comfort, somehow achieving absolute perfection in both areas organically. "You're not worried the crowd won't understand it?" Violet mocked loudly. The quiet dad just kept checking his rear motor housing, completely ignoring her corporate arrogance. "This car doesn't need to be understood," he fired back calmly. "It needs to be driven." He delivered the line deadpan. No dramatic comeback, just the cold, hard engineering truth. The billionaire CEO just stared, speechless. She had spent the last 3 years inside a luxury auto giant that sold polished corporate fairy tales. Picture this: selling the hype of a supercar long before the actual engineering was ever ready to perform. That was how the high-end automotive world worked today, and she had accepted it. But standing next to this handcrafted supercar, watching this humble underdog engineer perform his pre-run checks with the exact same quiet devotion he'd show in an empty garage, in his own private shop, with 0 crowd to impress, she felt a jarring contrast she couldn't even put into words. She confessed exactly what she had witnessed earlier that morning. After his technical question, the public humiliation, and the cruel laughter, 2 engineers from the luxury brand's battery team exchanged a knowing glance. She had been standing close enough to catch it happen. Not shock or denial, but the unmistakable dread of corporate insiders hearing a hidden truth said out loud, a fatal flaw they had all desperately covered up. The 71 to 74 degree stat was no isolated miscalculation by our underdog. It was a very real number that had appeared inside their secret internal testing logs 3 months prior, flagged by their own thermal engineers in a detailed report that executives clearly saw. And under crushing investor deadlines and product launch pressure, they simply buried it. The Apex supercar launched anyway. "I am not surprised," Mason replied calmly. He locked the rear service panel and stood up, quietly wiping grease off his hands with a rag from his back pocket. He wasn't furious about the deception, at least not in any visible, explosive way. Honestly, the genius mechanic seemed vastly less interested in the corporate sabotage than Violet expected. He just folded his greasy rag neatly and tucked it away. Before heading back to the glossy luxury pavilions, Violet stopped to ask him one final question. "Exactly when did you register for this outdoor demonstration slot?" Mason glanced at his watch, a beautifully humble black dial analog piece. Nothing fancy except a basic date window, and met her gaze. 6 months ago, right when the expo announced the outdoor strip was returning. She nodded in slow disbelief. The live vehicle demonstration events had been dead for 2 years, only coming back this spring. Mason grabbed his slot instantly, months before the Apex supercar was even revealed to the world. Months before his ultimate underdog comeback had even taken form today. She quietly walked away, toward the corporate suites without another word, while Mason turned toward his handcrafted machine, sliding his hand along its sleek roofline, testing the carbon tension with a silent intuition that was pure, unfiltered mechanical feeling. exactly like a master cellist tuning up before stepping out to face the crowd. Charlotte marched back to the VIP building, never looking back. Back inside the flashy Ventara booth, the arrogant afternoon PR cycle was spinning up, fresh slides, scrubbed media packets. The relentless glossy machine of a luxury product launch with 2 agonizing days left. She navigated the chaos efficiently, handling the elite international auto press with the robotic grace of someone who had the corporate lies hardwired into her nervous system. But at one specific moment, right mid-sentence while speaking to a top German automotive publication correspondent, she froze for a tiny fraction of a second longer than normally acceptable. The journalist missed it completely. Charlotte definitely noticed. Now you and I know what happens next. By mid-morning, the bleachers were rapidly packing out with eager expo spectators. The explosive final demonstration schedule glowed on giant digital screens framing the tarmac. The schedule showed 12 cars lined up by brand name, each with a specific model and a track time. 11 of those 12 slots belonged to massive luxury titans, billion-dollar tech startups, and elite European brands making flashy debuts. But the 12th entry at the bottom just read, Coal Dynamics Prototype 1. The rich VIPs in the stands read it, exchanging confused, mocking glances. Nobody knew this underdog builder at all. Journalist Adrian Holt skipped the rest of that flashy Ventara keynote. He grabbed a quiet table outside near the supercar track, flipped open his laptop, and dug in. For 40 straight minutes, he went down a massive rabbit hole. The kind of digging you do when you smell a massive corporate secret. He ran Mason Cole's name through his magazine's private database. And he read the hidden history of this unknown single dad. The man's resume was heavy. 10 years grinding at mid-level auto brands before joining Harrington. There Mason spent 8 quiet years engineering powertrains and battery tech, moving up the ranks to totally run their thermal engineering group. You and I need to look at these patents. They made Adrian sit back, stunned. Mason owned 9 different electric vehicle battery patents, all filed between 2014 and 2020. 4 of those brilliant designs sold in 2021, pushed through a middleman called Meridian IP Group directly to a parts supplier that later signed a massive deal with the arrogant Ventara Motors. Adrian read that connection twice, then slammed his laptop shut. He grabbed his heavy camera and marched straight toward the supercar track. Out on the tarmac, the Luxury Expo's tech team aggressively inspected every single car before letting it race. It was a strict standard drill, checking brakes, frame strength, wiring, and emergency kill switches. But then they reached Coal Dynamics, and Mason rolled his handcrafted car down. The head inspector, a huge no-nonsense guy named Ray. Ray had been clearing extreme race cars at these elite shows for 22 years. He started pacing around the handmade frame with totally bored, practiced speed, a routine he had done thousands of times, knowing in the first 30 seconds flat if this custom build passed or was a complete joke. Ray reached the rear motor, popped open the service panel, stared at the hidden genius inside, and just froze. He quickly waved his partner over. Both veteran mechanics just stood there, staring at the impossible electric engineering for 90 seconds straight. Total dead silence. Slowly, Ray snapped the panel shut and signed the sheet. He hammered down the approval stamp without speaking. Handing the clipboard back to the quiet dad, Ray walked away and simply muttered, "Nice work." And let me tell you, that hard-nosed inspector never gave empty compliments to anyone. Meanwhile, smug CEO Charlotte Vance used a break in her morning keynotes to strut down the glass hallway toward the track, an arrogant habit she built from years of stealing corporate secrets, spying on what rival luxury brands brought and how their supercars actually drove, reading the actual crowd reactions instead of just believing fake corporate press releases. She pushed through the massive double doors into the grandstands, expecting a joke, and stopped cold, looking over the asphalt. Another flashy demonstration run was underway, some elite European crossover finishing its high-speed pass, smooth expected. The wealthy crowd clapped politely. They were watching a well-executed machine, but honestly, nothing groundbreaking. CEO Charlotte scanned the staging lane. Her arrogant gaze drifted past million-dollar trailers, finally stopping at the very far end, where an unknown unbranded car sat ready to run. The paint was strange, a raw matte silver gray completely outside normal luxury palettes. The proportions defied every standard supercar class. She scoffed, turning to her assistant. "Whose car is that?" Her assistant checked the clipboard. Coal Dynamics. Tiny shop, Detroit address, absolutely zero media presence. Charlotte stared at the humble machine for a few seconds, sizing it up the way elites judge anything that dares to show up without a billion-dollar badge. "Keep an eye on it," she smirked, heading inside to prep for her highly publicized next session. Violet grabbed a spot right by the timing station at the midpoint of the track, just as the announcement cracked over the public. Address system for the final showcase run of the afternoon. No hype music, no flashy video package, no bloated corporate branding. The operator just bluntly read the schedule. Cole Dynamics Prototype 1. The handcrafted car crept out of staging, inching slowly toward the starting line. Picture this. The luxury-obsessed crowd stared with the intense curiosity of people who simply don't know what they are looking at yet. But they sensed that this underdog might just matter. The handmade supercar rolled forward without any normal engine sound. No roaring exhaust. Not even that high-pitched electric whine every major auto brand uses for their million-dollar performance EV models. There was just a faint, almost hidden hiss of a custom pneumatic pressure system equalizing, then dead quiet. The mystery car settled at the line. The window rolled down. The single dad behind the wheel was just wearing a cheap, pale blue button-down shirt. No sponsored helmet, no racing gloves, absolutely zero gear. Up in the VIP bleachers, rich executives frowned. One journalist standing near Adrian lowered her heavy camera, squinting hard. Adrian spotted Mason from 40 meters out. He quickly raised his lens and locked focus. The electronic timing tree started its standard countdown sequence. The heavy staging lights flashed through their rhythm. Yellow, yellow, green. An underdog Mason Cole pinned the throttle of a machine he built entirely by himself over 3 grueling years in some cheap rented garage on Detroit's gritty west side, scraping by on sold patents using custom parts that took him 8 agonizing months to source, engineering a brilliant suspension geometry entirely by hand, long before any expensive software touched it, because true genius masters the raw math before letting a computer do the heavy lifting. The car launched. Stick with me here, because what happened next wasn't just fast. Lasers clocked 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 2.9 seconds. 3/10 faster than the multi-million-dollar Ventara Apex managed in that exact lane earlier. But the sheer speed wasn't what paralyzed the laughing crowd. It was the freakish physics of the acceleration, how it actually moved. No violent wheel spin, no angry aggression, no wild sense of struggling mechanical force. The handmade car simply vanished. Picture this: 4 electric motors, 1 per wheel, fully independent. Run by code our underdog Mason built during 16 months of sleepless nights. They delivered torque so flawlessly smooth, his handmade supercar gripped the asphalt exactly like water hugging a curved glass, carving its natural line, no stutters, no panicked corrections. High-speed track cameras caught the magic. Those laughing luxury executives couldn't even see with their naked eyes. Every single tire kept absolute contact with the sealed track surface during the launch phase, completely skipping those tiny traction losses that always plague multi-million-dollar hypercars during a max-power launch. This wasn't some cheap parlor trick. It was pure hidden genius, his custom engineering working exactly like the single dad designed it. Hitting the 200-meter mark, with 0 warning or clearance from the elite officials, Mason slammed a total emergency brake, instantly followed by a violent 90-degree weight transfer. A dangerous stunt that, in any mainstream luxury auto at that speed, would trigger massive panic, demanding heavy driver steering just to survive. The humble car swallowed the shift, sliding into 31 degrees of yaw, then snapped perfectly back to center in 0.4 seconds. 0 frantic steering from our underdog. The smug crowd in those bleachers had gone totally silent during the launch, the specific way crowds do when watching a shocking upset they simply can't comprehend yet. When his handmade ride stabilized and cruised down the track like that, impossible physics-breaking drift was nothing special. Someone high in the luxury stands started clapping. Not a forced, polite clap from a guy seeking attention. Pure involuntary awe, the kind where your hands move before your brain catches up. That applause rippled through the VIPs like wildfire, driven entirely by undeniable raw shock. Up in the suite, CEO Charlotte Vance hit the glass. She didn't even remember dragging herself back to look. She was supposedly reviewing her keynote, ignoring him, when some unseen force she couldn't possibly ever explain pulled her straight into the corridor, walking blindly out through the heavy doors until she gripped the cold railing above the bleachers. She stepped out just in time to witness the final 100 meters. She watched the handmade vehicle slice the finish line, gracefully swinging into the exit lane with the exact same mocking, perfect precision it had all along. Then her corporate assistant, frozen beside her, slowly held out a tablet displaying the track's real-time telemetry feed. A raw data feed reserved strictly for elite automotive engineers. Stick with me here. Charlotte studied the screen, fixating on one terrifying number. The custom car's battery temperature right after that brutal run. Counting that violent braking stunt, which should have melted things, but read 58 degrees Celsius. 4 degrees cooler than the absolute limit she boasted about on her stage. On camera, backed by 3 years of her luxury brand's supposed superiority. The humiliated CEO just stared blankly at the impossible data. Right next to her, the assistant was staring too, speechless. Both titans of industry stood frozen at the railing while Mason Cole parked his garage-built miracle right on the mark, casually pushing his door open. That once lawing crowd immediately swarmed the Underdog and his brilliant machine. While Adrian Holt pushed through, camera raised, recording a comeback we'll never forget. 3 auto reporters had already swarmed Mason. 2 more bolted down the bleachers, rushing straight for the staging area. The CEO, Charlotte Vance, just watched from above. Barely 15 meters separated her luxury VIP balcony from his spot on the concrete floor. But it felt like a canyon separating 2 totally different worlds. Stick with me here. 20 minutes later, she finally stepped down to the expo floor once the swarm of cameras thinned out. She walked down alone, no assistants, no PR team, absolutely 0 handlers. The few reporters lingering near the handmade supercar noticed that detail right away. Including Adrian, he kept his audio recorder running. Charlotte stopped dead in front of the vehicle. She studied the custom engineering for a long second, then locked eyes with Mason. "I didn't know it was you," she finally said. Those 7 words carried way more weight than just a simple excuse. An apology, an admission, and a massive question packed into one breath. "I know," Mason replied, no anger in his voice, no bitter comeback at all. He spoke like he was just confirming the time of day. Then the CEO asked him how his thermal management system actually worked. He gave her the exact same technical breakdown she had laughed at hours earlier, but this time he added deep engineering layers, speaking in that same calm, quiet tone. He detailed the pressure cooling channels running straight down through every battery module, the predictive power load, a custom algorithm shifting power across the pack 600 times every second, predicting where the heat would spike before it ever actually happened, plus the exact cell tracking that let his handmade system instantly spot any single cell getting too hot and detour power around it before the main battery even noticed. Charlotte stood there completely silent. For a CEO used to total control, it was her first time truly listening without already knowing the final outcome. Her lead engineer, Violet, hovered near the edge of the chat, keeping her distance. Charlotte shot her a very direct, intense stare. The silent message that passed between the 2 women was absolute and clear. Violet had worked at Ventara Motors for 3 solid years. She had read their own flawed thermal testing report 4 months ago. She kept quiet publicly because in the corporate auto world, you only ever complain behind closed doors. Charlotte already knew exactly how corporate cowardice worked, and that brutal realization hit her hard. Then the journalist Adrian stepped right up, holding a printed paper. One single sheet he dug out of a patent database, highlighting the absolute key facts. He handed it over to them like a neutral observer, showing basic reporter politeness. But honestly, it was also a perfectly timed, brutal trap. "You and I need to see this." The paper exposed Ventara's battery patent history, the core filing, then the quiet transfer to Meridian in 2021, and the final licensing deal given straight to Ventara's parts supplier. The original genius inventor was listed right there. Adrian bluntly asked the CEO for a comment. She stared at the proof, then at Mason. Meanwhile, the quiet dad just admired his car. "I didn't sell those patents to cause trouble for your brand," Mason murmured, speaking to no one in particular. "I just needed the cash to build my supercar, that's it. Think about it." He spoke like someone fixing a small math error. He wasn't just faking indifference to their empire. Picture this. The quiet mechanic didn't want fame. He just wanted the pure engineering truth. Charlotte, the billionaire CEO, refused to answer the reporter's question. But her dead silence spoke volumes. The entire expo crowd instantly felt the shifting power. Then Mason, the underdog builder, turned to face her for the very first time. He held her gaze, no arrogance, no smug smile of a guy seeking cheap revenge. "The 71 to 74 degree figure I mentioned this morning. Your top engineers had that in their own validation documents 3 months ago, he said. I wasn't saying this to sabotage your big supercar launch. I brought it up because it is a real number. People driving your luxury car at high highway speeds need to know exactly what it means. He paused for a second, not for dramatic effect, but because he was quietly weighing if his next thought was worth sharing. You can laugh, call me a mechanic. But that doesn't fix your battery pack's thermal limits. Charlotte Vance had been the loudest, most arrogant voice at the most prestigious auto event all morning long. Now the powerful executive said absolutely nothing. Her stunned face wasn't just the look of a rich CEO losing a public argument. It was the terrifying realization of an executive who was blindsided by a fatal engineering flaw she never expected, a truth she could no longer hide. You could practically see her calculating the devastating financial ruin this shock reveal would bring tomorrow. Over the next 2 tense hours, Mason got 3 massive phone calls, all dialed from the tiny business card tucked deep inside the rear cabin of his own handmade supercar. Finding that card meant actually opening his custom doors to look inside. Several luxury auto executives had quietly done exactly that, snapping photos for their bosses. One caller was a heavy-hitting mobility venture fund Mason actually recognized by name. The second was a massive industrial engineering firm desperately wanting his vehicle tech. The third call came from a suit whose first sentence made it clear he ran the ruthless capital allocation wing of a North American fund with enough cash to buy out most of the exotic car brands showing off inside the main expo. Mason took all 3 calls. He stayed incredibly polite and brief. He calmly told them he wasn't doing any real business deals that dramatic afternoon. He simply wrote down their contact info, completely refusing to promise them a single thing. The single dad had negotiated before, sure, but never with sharks this big. Still, the hidden genius understood the game well enough to keep his cool under the immense pressure. Meanwhile, journalist Adrian Holt filed his explosive automotive story at 4 in the afternoon, sitting right at the same cafe where he researched that morning. Stick with me here. The headline he typed wasn't anything he ever imagined writing when he walked into the luxury show. He had been covering these high-end industry events long enough to know the real scoop was never found inside the glossy press kits the billionaires handed out. It was the shocking story that crashed the party out of nowhere, sparked by a humble outsider asking a brilliant technical question no one was ever supposed to ask. He read his Underdog comeback headline once, knew it was pure fire, and hit submit. Within 3 insane hours, the article went so incredibly viral that the news site's servers nearly melted from the massive traffic, forcing the tech team to flag the massive traffic spike in their logs. By that evening, 3 major auto magazines dropped follow-up pieces praising the unknown engineer. And just one wire service caught that shocking patent lineage, the hidden link tying cold dynamics to Meridian intellectual property, and the Ventara Motors licensed battery architecture blasted straight out to their entire subscriber list. At 6 o'clock, the Luxury Auto Expo began shutting down. Event staff swept the outdoor zone, grabbing signs and tearing down cables. Tow trucks dragged the corporate trailers back into their staging positions. The stands emptied out, full of that heavy exhaustion you only get after standing and staring for hours. Violet had fled, Adrian had vanished. The stunned press corps scattered, chasing hotel bars and tight deadlines. But watch Mason. He stood alone in staging, replacing his trailer's canvas. He draped his handcrafted supercar, relying on the same methodical, careful process he used to unveil it that morning. He was in no rush. The laughing crowd was gone. But honestly, in Mason Cole's quiet mind, he never brought his engineering masterpiece here to perform for them anyway. He just worked in the fading light. And in Michigan during October, that fading light turns absolutely everything. Sepia at the edges, making normal objects feel like they're being quietly remembered instead of actually witnessed. Once the cover was tight and his trailer locked up, he simply stood beside his custom vehicle in silence. The massive lot was basically empty now. Just a few cars and lingering staff drifting like ghosts through harsh pools of fluorescent light from the main building. He didn't look like a guy celebrating an impossible victory. He just looked like a quiet creator who brought his brilliant machine to a place where it could be witnessed. The world had finally seen it, and now he was done. He climbed into the truck cab and fired the engine. Hauling his trailer out of the lot at 6:57, he swung east onto the dark highway access road, pointing toward Detroit as the sun died. That unbelievable supercar behind him made absolutely zero sound as it traveled. It just rolled forward exactly as he designed it to, in perfect silence, efficiently, at whatever temperature the unforgiving laws of physics demanded, and not 1 degree more.